With state-of-the-art radars scanning its skies and large stocks of highly accurate, lightning-fast missiles ready and waiting to intercept any enemy threats that dared to enter its airspace, Russia thought it was safe. It was wrong. After years of hard work and concentrated effort, Ukraine has ripped the Kremlin's air defense network apart. Its targeted attacks have opened gaps and passageways for drones and missiles to fly through and stripped the shields from Russian assets and infrastructure. Once heavily protected sites are now vulnerable and exposed, with locations across the entire nation being blown up and set ablaze by Ukrainian weapons. And the weaker Russia's air defenses get, the more damaging Ukrainian strikes become, plunging the Russian President Vladimir Putin into a deeper and darker hole from which he may never escape. It's taken a long time to get to this stage. Ukraine first started targeting Russian air defenses way back in 2022, during the first year of the war, but struggled to plan and execute these kinds of attacks with any serious frequency or regularity, as it was too busy defending its frontline territories and fending off Russia's relentless aggression. But as the years went by, the early intensity of the war began to settle down somewhat, and Ukraine found its feet. Its domestic defense industry improved, with firms designing and developing an increasingly broad and devastating array of drones and missiles. Its strategies improved too, with Kyiv's commanders continuously finding ways to outsmart their enemies and catch them off guard. And so, as the years went by, reports slowly but surely began to emerge of more and more attacks on Russian air defense assets, like radar systems and missile launch platforms, sometimes valued at millions or even billions of dollars. Early on, these attacks were important and impactful, but didn't necessarily matter that much in the long term, as Russia had plentiful supplies of air defenses and could easily replace those that had been lost or damaged with other systems. But as time passed and the losses added up, Russia's supply started to dwindle, and its commanders were given increasingly difficult problems to solve, with more blind spots and defensive gaps across its vast territory. Ukraine, meanwhile, continued to ramp up the intensity, carrying out attacks in greater numbers with each passing year. 2025, for example, was a record-breaking year for Ukraine in terms of damaging and destroying Russian air defenses. Mostly relying on long-range drones, the Ukrainian armed forces were able to deal an estimated $4 billion worth of damage to their enemies' assets, wiping out the likes of logistic hubs, radar arrays, and anti-aircraft batteries, not just in frontline areas and occupied territories, but in regions deep into Russia, hundreds of miles from the active combat zone. In a statement issued in early 2026, the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, summed up the effects of these attacks, writing, "These operations had a systemic effect. They opened corridors through Russia's multi-layered air defense system and enabled the safe passage of Ukrainian long-range drones deep into enemy territory, striking military bases, ammunition depots, airfields, and other strategic targets." And when 2025 came to an end, Ukraine didn't ease off the pressure. It pushed its advantage. In the early months of 2026, it carried out dozens of fresh, damaging attacks against Russia's air defenses, further crippling the country's ability to defend itself and undermining the Kremlin's claims about its so-called world-leading defensive systems. In January, for example, a 9S-32M1 radar, which is part of Russia's S-300V air defense system, was wiped out. In January, Ukrainian forces struck Kapustin Yar's State Central Inter-Service Missile Test Range in Russia's Astrakhan region, with damage confirmed to a facility where ballistic missiles were assembled, serviced and tested. In March, Ukraine celebrated even more successful strikes on air defense assets like a Russian S-400 Triumph mobile launcher and a Buk M3 air defense system. These are just a few examples, with records showing that Ukraine carried out well over 40 confirmed strikes in the first quarter of 2026 alone. That included 25 strikes on radar systems and another 19 on launch platforms. Or, to be more precise, here's a full list of all the launch platforms that Ukraine targeted and took out in that time period, according to open-source intelligence analyst Clement Molin. 6 Buk systems, including both launchers and transporter loader vehicles from the Buk M1, M2, and M3 variants. 5 Tor systems, including both the conventional Tor M1 and M2 variants, plus the rare Arctic Tor M2 DT, which was specifically designed to withstand extremely low temperatures to operate in Arctic conditions. 5 short-range cannon and missile Pantsir systems, including both S1 and S2 variants. One of these systems was taken out by a heavy-duty Ukrainian FP2 drone carrying a whopping 220-pound, 100-kilogram warhead. And it's also worth noting that one of the Pantsirs destroyed by Ukraine was a unique model that had never been seen in combat before and was mounted on a Belarusian MZ-KT 7930 chassis. 2 OSA systems were also destroyed. They're worth over $10 million each, but were wiped out by some of the cheapest drones in Ukraine's arsenal, serving as yet another reminder of how cost-effective Kyiv's drones can be. In addition to all of the aforementioned targets, Ukraine also managed to take out at least one of Russia's S-300 systems, multiple S-400 launchers, coastal systems like Bastion missile launchers, and some other short-range Russian systems like the Tunguska and Strela 10. On their own, each of these systems may not matter all that much. Russian commanders wouldn't necessarily be too phased, for example, about losing the odd launch platform here and there. But when dozens are being targeted and wiped out with such regularity, it becomes a serious problem, one that the Kremlin cannot simply ignore, as air defense expert Thomas Nagy notes. If you accumulate a sufficient number of tactical successes, it already becomes highly relevant at the operational level. And that's just the launch platforms. Molin and other open-source intelligence analysts also found evidence to support the destruction of 25 different radar systems in the early months of 2026, including the 92N6A and 92N6E tracking radars, which effectively serve as the eyes of the S-400 air defense system. Rare 9S15 Imbir and 9S32M1 radars, both used in the S-300V system, have also been taken out, and so too have radars from the S-350 Vityaz system, like the 50N6E multi-function radar. Russia has also suffered the loss of several expensive members of the Nebo radar family, like the 55Z H6U Nebo U and 1L119 Nebo SVU, which is valued at $100 million, along with the Podlet and Castor 2E2 low-altitude radar systems. Several early warning and anti-drone radars have also been destroyed, like the P-18-2 Prima, the P-18 Terex, and the Sopka-2, as well as air traffic control systems such as the RSP-10. Now, some of these radars and air defense platforms date back to the Soviet era, while others are much newer, and many of them rank among the very best options that Russia has to defend its air and protect its infrastructure. But they're being systematically wiped off the map, and there appears to be very little that Russia can do about it. Despite all of the Kremlin's propaganda and boastful claims about systems like the S-400 and Buk M3, none of these platforms seem to be reliable or resilient enough to withstand Ukraine's drone attacks. And the more of them Ukraine takes out, the bigger its advantage becomes. Nagy describes it as a kind of Swiss cheese effect, stating, "You have a very solid cheese, but there are holes inside. That's what the Russian air defense system looks right now. Obviously, the Ukrainians want those holes to become bigger and bigger." To illustrate this point, when Ukraine takes out a few systems like Tor M2s, for example, that creates a physical gap in Russia's air defense network, with a diameter of anywhere from 30 to 60 miles or 50 to 100 kilometers. That's a huge patch of land suddenly left unguarded, allowing literally hundreds of Ukrainian medium and long-range strike drones to pass through and penetrate enemy airspace, with almost zero risk of being detected or shot down in the process. Again, one gap here and there wouldn't be such an issue, as long as the rest of the air defense network remains strong. But, as the statistics show, this isn't just one or two gaps. Ukraine is blowing dozens of holes into the Russian network with every passing month, and if it can keep up or even increase this pace, the effects will be devastating, as Nagy notes. If the Ukrainians can really strike and severely damage 40 systems every month, that's huge. The Russians have no way around the problem, because that's already 500 per year, and that's massive. No country can cope with that. And Russia is already finding it remarkably hard to cope, resorting to desperate measures to plug the gaps in its defenses. But quick side note, if this is the kind of insight you want more of, make sure you're subscribed to The Military Show. We break it down like this every week. Now, earlier in the war, if Russia lost an air defense system, it wasn't a big issue. There were plenty more systems in reserve that could be rolled out to replace those that had been damaged. These days, it's a very different story. With fewer and fewer assets at its disposal, the Kremlin is no longer able to defend all the areas it wants to, and must instead prioritize the most important locations and sacrifice certain areas when repositioning its defensive assets. The country has come under such intense pressure from Ukraine's attacks that there have been reports of Russia withdrawing multiple Castor 2E2 low-altitude radar systems from its border with Finland, a NATO nation, in order to fill some of the holes closer to the front lines of Ukraine. Even Russian officials have been forced to admit that the country's air defenses are no longer sufficient to protect the whole nation, with State Duma deputy Andrei Gurylyov stating that Russia cannot operate a continuous shield, but must instead allocate its limited resources to protect the biggest cities and most important pieces of critical infrastructure. That means that certain areas are now completely exposed, and Ukraine is getting ready to take full advantage. It's gearing up for some enormous upgrades to its aerial capabilities, like the arrival of 4++ generation Mirage 2005 fighter jets from France. Equipped with advanced avionics technology, these jets boast a 98% success rate when it comes to intercepting Russia's cruise missiles and Shahed attack drones. They're capable of dealing extensive damage to the enemy assets too, with the aid of their onboard AASM hammer-guided bombs or Storm Shadow missiles. The Ukrainian Air Force is also expected to soon integrate the JAS-39 Gripen supersonic multi-role fighter aircraft from Sweden. An exceptionally flexible fighter, the Gripen is able to take off from only short stretches of runway and can be refueled and rearmed in between sorties in just 15 minutes, so it's ready to scramble again and carry out successive operations with only minimal downtime. As far as its offensive capabilities go, the Gripen can carry Meteor missiles with a maximum range of up to 125 miles or 200 kilometers, which should be very helpful in pushing Russia's own aircraft back from the front lines and opening even more passageways for future Ukrainian deep strikes. The more damage that Ukraine can do to Russia's air defenses today, the more impactful these kinds of aircraft will be tomorrow. But Ukraine isn't waiting around. It's already using the weapons it has in its arsenal to exploit weaknesses in the enemy's air defense network and deal serious damage in the process. Throughout the first quarter of 2026, there have been confirmed reports of devastating deep strikes on numerous Russian military plants, bases, and munition stockpiles. In January, for instance, Ukraine struck one of Russia's biggest ammunition depots, situated over 550 miles or 900 kilometers from the Ukrainian border in the Kostroma region. There, not far from the town of Neya, Ukrainian drones honed in on the 100th GRAU arsenal, with satellite images of the site showing numerous active fires and blast marks in the hours and days that followed. This facility has the capacity to store up to 150,000 tons of ammunition, and it's likely that thousands of tons were annihilated in the attack. In February, Ukraine struck again, this time targeting the Votkinsk plant. Making the most of clear flight corridors running over 800 miles, 1,300 kilometers into Russia, Ukrainian long-range Flamingo missiles struck this ballistic missile factory, responsible for producing some of the fastest and most powerful weapons in the Kremlin's arsenal, like the new hypersonic Oreshnik missiles and the RSM-56 Bulava submarine launch missiles. In March, Russia once more felt the full force of Ukraine's firepower. This time, the target was the Kremny EL microelectronics plant situated in Russia's Bryansk region. 7 Storm Shadow missiles struck the plant, which is one of the biggest and most important facilities for producing chips needed for the Iskander missiles and even some S-400 air defense systems too. So, this attack managed to deal a serious blow to Russia's offensive and defensive capabilities all in one fell swoop. These again are only a few examples. Ukraine has also carried out numerous other attacks on Russian territory, targeting oil ports, refineries, pipelines, logistic hubs and more. All of these attacks add up, and the fact that Ukraine is so actively continuing to weaken Russia's defenses is particularly important. Every time it wipes out a stockpile or forces a missile production plant to shut down, it's minimizing the Kremlin's capacities to defend itself. Meanwhile, the destruction of radars and launch platforms opens up more gaps, more corridors, more pathways for drones, Flamingo missiles, and other destruction-dealing aerial weapons to travel through, forcing Russia into a corner with no way out. At the same time, it would be wrong to say that Russia's air defenses have been completely obliterated. This is Russia, after all, the world's biggest nation with one of the largest militaries known to man. A country that went into this war with thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of armored vehicles, and huge numbers of radars and air defenses too. It hasn't lost all of those defenses. Indeed, a report from the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, confirms that Russia's monolithic structure and large number of subordinate entities ensures that the country still possesses a dense and relatively sophisticated air and missile defense network. It has factories that continue to churn out new systems and munitions, and despite Ukraine's many success stories, there are also cases in which Russia's systems manage to bring down their enemies' drones and missiles before they have a chance to strike their targets. But Ukraine is adapting to that too. For example, it now tends to carry out its attacks by first launching drone swarms designed to saturate the enemy's air defenses and clog up their radar screens before the cruise missiles follow up from behind, passing through without being intercepted and dealing colossal damage on impact. And since Ukraine has developed such an efficient drone production industry, it can make the unmanned aerial vehicles it needs in massive quantities without having to spend a fortune to do so. What's more, while Russia's air defense network still has some substance to it, it's undoubtedly getting weaker, and not just because of Ukraine's strikes, but because of sanctions too. The same RUSI report notes that Russia relies heavily on Western components, like printed circuit boards from an American company called Rogers Corporation, to create some of its most important air defense equipment, like the scanned array radars seen in the S-500 systems. Russian engineers also use Western-designed programs like Altium Designer and ANSYS when developing and simulating defensive systems. Sanctions imposed on Russia by the Western world are making it harder for Moscow to acquire these components and access this software. The more time goes by, the harder this will get, and it may reach a point where Russian defense firms simply are no longer able to function as they once did, with production levels plummeting and fewer missiles, radars, and defense platforms rolling off production lines. Meanwhile, Ukraine appears fully willing, able, and eager to continue making the most of its advantage, not giving the Russians a single moment of respite. They're upping the ante all the time, and if Ukraine can keep up the pace, or even increase the frequency of its attacks on enemy air defenses, there's absolutely no way that Russia will be able to keep up. In the long term, this means that Ukraine will be able to keep bringing the war home to Russia, with the country's defense contractors suffering the most, and everyday Russian people also feeling the heat as drones and missiles soar through the skies above their heads, wiping out the country's military and oil infrastructure one piece at a time. And with fewer defenses to protect their most valuable assets and locations, the Kremlin's commanders will be left having to choose which places to protect and which ones to simply abandon. Now you can learn more about how Russia is suffering in this video, which looks at how Ukraine's recent attacks have decimated the country's oil industry, wiping out decades of Putin's efforts in the span of a single week. Alternatively, check out this video for a harrowing look at the grim reality of life as a Russian soldier, exploring how the Kremlin's troops are often brutalized by their own commanders or sent off on suicidal assault missions without the training, equipment, or armor they need to survive. And finally, make sure to subscribe to the Military Show too for more videos just like this.